Today's episode is sponsored by my friends at Flint Custom Hats right here in Lubbock, Texas. Cowboys, ranchers, and other folks who wear hats are generally particular about their hats and have a preference on everything from the fit to the color to the dimensions and especially the crease. Well, Flint Custom Hats can make a hat to your exact specifications and one made to perfectly fit your head. You can order your own custom hat and check them out online at flinthat.com. I'd like to start today's show with a poem written by the great S. Omer Barker in 1924. This was from Barker's very first book and was written when he was a young man. I set this poem to music a number of years ago and recorded it on my album Cowboy Songster, Volume 2. This piece reminds me of today's guest, J.M. Cates, and I'd like to dedicate it to his memory. Here's Into the West. Traced in the flicker of greasewood fire, the cowboy kid saw his heart's desire. Still but a lad in a play cow camp, his ears heard the milling remuda stamp. He knew his heart would know no rest. He could scratch 'em along with the best. Over the shouldered maces ride, saddle a creek with his horse's stride. A boy a dream for the time when he could answer the range's witchery. Ruddled there by the hearth fire's flame, grizzled and old as a Salem dame. His hair is whitish as alkali. The cowboy kid sees his past go by. He smells the sage off the mace's rim. Days come tumbling back to him, days that were tinged with the smell of hair, burnt to the brand, came clean and fair. Nights that were drone with the milling herd, his feeble heart within him stirred. And out of the phantom in the flame, into his soul, the old call came. Oh, a heart knows not when a body is old. Riding days are a tale that is told. For he would saddle and over the hill, ride to the ranges that beckoned him still. There by the fire, as he fell asleep, the old man's pulses ceased their sweep of cowboy blood through his leather veins. A west wind called from his sagebrush plains, and off to dim ranges of mounted men, the cowboy kid rode forth again. Howdy folks, this is Andy Hedges, and you're listening to Cowboy Crossroads. On each episode, I interview a different guest and ask them to share stories and discuss music, poetry, and culture from the working cowboy West and beyond. My guest today is cowboy and musician J.M. Cates. J.M. Cates was born in 1936 and worked on the XL and LX ranches in Amarillo, Texas, and spent a good part of his life ranching in Clayton, New Mexico. He played fiddle in the Western Cowpunchers band, and up until his death, he was the oldest living member of the band. I had the opportunity to interview J.M. on August 22nd of this year during the Western Cowpunchers reunion when he was 88 years old. J.M. turned 89 a few days later on August 30th and then passed away a little over a month later on October 2nd. I'd like to offer my condolences to J.M.'s family, and I'd like to thank my friends at the Western Cowpunchers Association for arranging this interview. There were a few people in the room during this interview, including J.M.'s longtime friend, Eddie Colley, and you'll hear J.M. mention Eddie throughout the interview. Here's J.M. Cates.
There's J.M. Cates, and I was born in Crowell, Texas, in 8/30/36.
Did you grow up ranching?
Oh, well, my granddad did, but we just took care of had to go milk, about 4 o'clock in the morning, and while he'd get on a horse or even drive a vehicle, had to save that fuel, But, of course, we're just old tow-headed kids, and little old story I've told before about, childhood days. My dad got to thinking a lot of people back in those days had the ulcerated stomach. So he got the idea of raise them nanny goats and get them in production and haul them and sell them to them people over there at Crowell, that town. So my brother, just younger than me, Jerry, that made the bits and spurs and stuff, this little old billy goat, he's just about that tall. And he got where he'd dry up and butt heads of that little old goat. Well, as it got older, man, that bird got rank. So a little further on down the deal, my dad kept a little old 22 with a door in the kitchen. Had hogs running out, pigs, and he had an old pair of shorts on. Heard the coyotes out running them pigs. So he jumped up and got that old 22 and run out there and went shooting, run them coyotes off. But heading back to the house, that billy goat met him. He had to throw that thing down and outrun it and get back to the yard. And that thing, we've hit 2-inch pipes and axes and everything in the world, But, a fella kind of go to cut a bundle of feed. He hit me one time, knocked me about 20 foot. He's just a mean bugger. And we went on a vacation. My dad liked to get her work called up and go to the mountains in August. So his brother, he had him to come and do the chores. get the milk cows and everything. They just run out in the pasture, mesquite pasture. So we went out there one day, and he said he could smell that old goat to him, billy goat stink. And so when he got the cows, well, here come that goat. And he run up a little old mesquite tree and said that old goat would rear up and hit it and nearly just take it down and then come back up. So he finally thought he had to do something, so we had a bunch of old kitchen matches everybody smoked. So he got striking him, dropping it down on that goat. Finally set him afire. I can just imagine that thing leaving there, smoke rolling. Well, when we come back, my dad, he couldn't figure out what was wrong with that goat, no hair on it. So his brother had to tell him, he had to set him afire to get back away from him. Man, he's a tough booger. But yeah, we just old wild kids. My mother put us outside. We had an old dog called the Denny. And she just latched the screen door and said, "You boys go find something to do." We'd go hunting, and that old dog would run in front of us and stop us and kill a rattlesnake. And, she was our babysitter. And then my mother would holler for dinner and what have you. So that old house just sat on rocks, didn't have a regular foundation, just old 1x12 slab walls, One time a knot hole fell out like back there, and a bird got in the kitchen. My dad got the bird out, and then he just cut the bottom out of a tomato can and nailed over that hole. Patch it. They didn't have any wallpaper. One of them it did. You could read the news, everything else, order out of the Montgomery Ward catalogs. So it kind of was a little bit different than what modern day kids, they couldn't even imagine what in the world we went through, And my dad, he liked to raise horses and mules. And I guess, I've been thrown off 2 times in my life. I guess I was maybe 10 years old the first time that my mother was in the hospital with my youngest brother. My aunt was taking care of us, so my dad, he'd just catch them old colts. We'd get them when you'd wean them. And me and Jerry, my brother, we'd just act like monkeys, get on the fence and jump on them and get them gentle, and halter break them. So when they got about 20 months old, our dad would just had an old hackamore, we called it back in those days, those old set of plaited lines, soft reins. He'd just come here, son, get you by the arm and throw you up on them colts bareback. And we learned to ride, it's like Indians. And he wouldn't let us ride in a saddle later on. When we got to where we'd ride in the saddle, he'd tell us about holding the reins tight. He said, "Boy, if you hold them reins too tight, they'll just trick you off over their head." And learned a lot about riding young horses back then. So one time we'd had a bunch of them colts, 8 or 9 of them, pretty gentle, they didn't rain a little. So he took them over at Quanah, Texas, to the sale. And he come back and he just tickled death. He said, "Boys, them colts brought 12 and a half a head. $12.50, you wouldn't even get enough gas to get over there today." So we kind of grew up pretty countrified, Get up 4 o'clock. He worked for the neighbors over there, and he kept a horse staked all the time. He always fed and take care of it. It might be a pretty frank horse. He'd get on in the dark and ride about 4 miles and work all day and get back sundown, maybe for, I guess he got 75 cents a day. He might have could have got $1. Well, it was our job to do all the chores, milk the cows, feed the hogs and all that stuff, come back and clean up and catch the bus to go to school. So he wasn't a mean man, but he was pretty strict, If he asked you something, you better tell him the truth. If you fabricated it a little bit and he found out, I'd rather have that first whipping than that second one. He had overhauled the young'un pretty good. But, we just kept going. And, of course, he passed away when I was 14. And my mother, there's 6 of us kids. Well, she run off and left us. And three of the youngest ones went and stayed with my aunt. My older brother got drafted, so I just left me and Jerry, the boy younger than I was, just like two pack rats, lived there, and I had to get the jobs, and it seemed like I've been grown all my life, you know.
What did y'all start doing for work at that age?
Well, I'd do anything. We'd unload them 90-pound cement bags out of box cars. We'd shovel burrs for people, you know, that go to gin and get them old burrs. Would tromp them and take and feed them to the cattle, put them in feeders and stuff. So he taught a fellow how to use a shovel and a pair of post hole diggers. You know, it seemed like some people today running them computers, hand phones, they wouldn't have no idea. And he was particular, he was about my height. We'd dig them old post holes, and we'd usually go cut cedar trees to get ready to build a fence. In the winter, after we got all of our work done, he'd take fence building it by the mile. And, you know, he was a particular booger. That button right there, me and him be just about my height, and we'd set a post. He'd pull it over, it had to touch that button. If it was an inch short, you had to put a little dirt in there and pack it to get it up. But if it's a little tall, you had to dig on down. And he said, boys, I don't ever want to see a chip where y'all cut a post off. You had to put it right there. And you could shoot a gun down the top of them, he'd line them up. And I was going to take my grandson maybe later on and show him a fence we built. Well, before he passed away, it had been 70 or 80 years nearly since that fence was built, and it's still just right there like we left it. But he just was that way. It had to be like shocking bundles or hauling bundle feed. It had to be straight on that trailer, you know. And I asked him one time, I said, but they'd take a board and beat them all in straight, go down and shock them for the night, for the cattle in the winter. And they'd just haul them over there, going to unload them in an hour, but this had to be perfect on that old trailer. So I asked him, I said, what in the world would it make any difference? He said, well, what if somebody leaned over and looked? Want it to be straight. But yeah, he has taught us a whole lot while he was alive. So then I got out, I'd ride horses, learned it from him, stake them, and go to school, and I could get 30 saddlings for $10. He rode them every day for 30 days for $10. And now, you know, you couldn't even buy gas to get out there to them or a sack of feed. But a fella got started there and finally got a chance to get a job on a ranch. They'd kind of hire them hoodlums, you know, young fellas to do about everything. And got started there, and then ended up years and years later was a foreman of the, probably about one of as big a ranch in the Texas Panhandle out here at north of the river. This boy right here, Eddie, I met him the 8th day of 58 down there, hard out that Bivens Ranch down there at the Alexis. I had a job lined up. My brother-in-law had it rigged up for me to look after some wheat pasture cattle and had a little old feed yard and deal. Well, a girl that I later married was going to college down here at that old college. And so kind of, you know, a young cowboy might get needing to come and see them, you know, from down there at Crowell. So I come up, and the day I got here, though that job blowed up, these two old fellers, my brother-in-law heard it there at the sale barn out here. They had a partnership on some cows. And this one fella, he just sold them. And they was on the trucks going north. Well, this other old man walked up. I'll just use some names. He said, Sam, I didn't want to sell them cattle. I said, get them back here. I don't know, slicker deal coat. This other old boy was mouthy. These two boys knew of him. He reared back. He said, I'll just go home and get my gun. That old fellow reached in. He said, I don't have to go get mine. He had it right with him, and he got on the phone, got them stopped at Stratford, Texas, and brought them boogers back. So that's pretty good showing, Well, there went my job. And this brother-in-law worked around the sale barn, and said there's a foreman in there asking if they can find a single hand. And gave me his number, and I called, and he said, just meet me out there at the ranch. Told me how to get there. Well, the first fellow I met is sitting right over there. And I don't know how in the world I could pick a mandolin a little, and he could second. How we got them two old instruments, he probably had to be got them tuned. And we was playing Ragtime Annie or something when the foreman showed up. We've been playing that many years.
Now, was that the first kind of big ranch job you had, or had you been
Well, I
working
come
other?
off one that we was born and raised just a mile from that Wagner 3D, and I was working at the Circles as a cousin to him. And we was born and raised just a mile from Wagner's west fence. My dad would go down. One time he took us, we had an old gray mare out, one of them breed of horses at Poco Wayno, they called him. And he'd put us on her double, barefooted. We'd ride down them Jordan pins, and he'd help them brand and stuff out down there at that. So we got to see some real cowboys work, But we just old barefooted kid. All the time a feller's wanting to be, somebody. But, fellers, I guess done reasonably good. Of course, they roped horses back in them days, and I was left-handed. Every horse I got on, a lot of them ranches didn't want you roping. And, of course, this boy over here, we've done a lot of roping out here. They had that back in pink eye days. And they had some old stuff they called Smear 62, just black, stinking stuff, had benzene in it. We'd put it around that eye, and they'd kind of heal up, I guess it. So this foreman told me one time, he said, of course he looked at my rope, we'd come in, and he was always looking, he had them old grass ropes. And we was always breaking them, having to tie new Hondas in them, and he'd look through them bifocals as you rode up, see how sweaty your horses was, and he knew good well what we'd been doing. So one time he told me, he said, we better go to town and get some new ropes. It's going to be snake killing time pretty soon. And of course, we'd rope them old cows and jerk them down just for the fun of it. And I was just crazy about wanting to learn to rope. And first time I got a chance to rope, horses back then, you couldn't walk up to them. A lot of times they just be behind a rope. You had just somebody'd come out with a bridle on their arm, tell you look at them, they'd tell you what they wanted. An old kid told me he wanted old Snowball. Well, of course, I looked at a bunch of horses. I didn't been there long enough you had to learn the names of every one of them and what the looks of them horses. I kept looking and couldn't. Finally, he used the door and said, it's that solid black one right over there, old Snowball. Kind of made the feller feel a little funny. But the feller, just kept getting a little bit better off at that circle outfit. They had to cross that old Wichita River. It was a boggy river. Horses bogged down. And they had special horses that you rode. They called them river horses. And had one that called him Old Frankie, big old black horse, the white spot. And the foreman said, when you go to catch him, lead him. That booger just be bug-eyed, snorting, looking at you. And little young kid, he'd be a little bit dry-mouthed, have to get on that old thing. And he said, he won't do nothing. You just swell up when you cinch him up, turn him around, he'll go down. He won't pitch. But said, now when you start across that river, you get the boggin just about that deep. He said he'll just lay over. Just get off of him, get out far enough that he won't get on you if he tries to get up. So just wait on him. He'd get up, walk a little, and all them old horses was broke to work in that quicksand, and it'd save your life. So a feller, he learned that kind of stuff from down there in the old mesquite, brushy country. And of course, I was young, and full of vinegar, and they'd talk about some old wild cow. Well, she'd just spoiled. They'd let her get away, and I'd try to make it a point to get them gathered, hem them up in the corner just for the aggravation of it. Running through them old mesquite trees. When I come to this country, out here north of the river, coming out of that brush country, I just like a young, shoot, crazy horse. I could look and see way across the country, and we was working some cattle out here on top of the hill. I guess Edie was probably there, and had them out, the little mesquites about that tall. So one of them old cows broke out, and I always was trying to make them horses jump soap weeds and sagebrush and everything in the world, and went out there and brought that cow back. And that foreman looked at me and said, "You better watch them trees, it'll put your eyes out." Well, I'd come out of them, you couldn't even see the sun. I thought that was kind of funny, these little old shrubs, But a feller, he learned down there, they'd just drop you off. You couldn't see or hear nothing. After you'd hear somebody holler, you'd know to start moving into the drive. And up here, of course, you can see a section a lot of times. You just watch everybody spread out and gather them. But down there, you just hear brush breaking. Them old horses is silly. Their old ears get to working. They'd want to run and turn them cattle. They'd just run. Good thing a feller had learned to ride fairly good. They'd just jump a kind of a small mesquite and jump into a clearing. They couldn't go anywhere, and they'd just come right back out. So they'd just spin and come back out, so you better be sitting pretty close to them. They'd just strip you off, So a feller got that education when he just a little old kid riding them young colts. So a feller stayed there at least, got a chance to come up here. I'd work, of course, neighbored and everything around there. People need somebody just for a day. And the first time I ever got to work in one, they just gathered the cattle up in a corner. 6 or 8 men hold them. They just took their branding far off out in there and heel the calves and brand them out there, and all we had to do was just hold them. That was my first real cowboy experience. But when I was a little old kid riding a broom in the yard, of course, that old thing would throw me off, and I'd grab it, give it a whipping, and then my dad is successful and my granddad. So I wanted to be like them, I had an ambition then to be where I'm at today, of course. I had my own country and cattle and everything, so I felt I pretty well accomplished everything you set out to do. Beavins XL. Well, I was at the LX's. I'd gotten married, my wife living right off over here in an old camp. And I was riding young horses there. Eddie had already moved on to town, and my younger brother, Jerry, he'd got out of the Army and was working down there at the same place I'd worked there at that circle outfit. So I guess the boss kind of liked the way I work, so he wanted to know if there's anybody down that brush country that'd like to come up here and go to work. So I called my brother. I asked him would he be interested in coming up here and working with us. I said, "What have y'all been doing?" He was a bellyache and said, "Oh, we're down here at the farm having to haul hay." Well, every 4th of weekend of August, they had the old Cowpunchers reunion here. And the boss, he'd say, well, he'd been eliminated to come over here and help. So me and this boy here, we went to hauling hay in August, hot down there in them old cottonwood trees and rattlesnakes and everything. And he had an old gentleman he knew and going to have a birthday party. I could pick a man in a little bit, and Eddie could play rhythm, and we couldn't play nothing but Over the Waves and I don't know, about Fraulein or something, about 4 or 5 songs. So they wanted us to come over there and play for his deal. So while we was over there, this foreman of where we was working hit us up, said y'all wouldn't mind coming and playing over here that next time in August. It says having the cowpuncher reunion. And the old man told me that this thing started in Plainview, Texas, 1910. And then they moved it here. And they had a little roping arena and everything out here. These cowboys come. And of course, they had the steak supper and the barbecue. And of course, all them old fellers had plenty of nectar they could cipher on, you know. So we started then, played, I don't know what, 80, 25, 30 years. Every Saturday night right here. And, you know, we've played in Fort Worth and different places, just played for the entertainment, I guess. We didn't get paid a whole lot over there, but had to move to Clayton, took a job over there. And had to show up here, you know, and one night that old snow was blowing bad, you know, and we just got the take of the door. So when we got through playing, I think we got $3 each when they. But, you know, we didn't play for the money, just the entertainment of it and what have you. But a fella got that job up there, and then that deal played out. And I went back down here and went to work over here at Stockyard a while, and then got a chance to go looking after wheat pasture cattle for a pretty big operator. And done that, and then kind of got a little bit burned out of that horse roping, doctoring, just every day, 7 days a week, prowling cattle, counting is all under electric fence. Have to check them aggravating old fences, you know, iced over and tumbleweeds blow into them. And so this old boy jumped me and wanted to know if I'd like to move to Clayton, New Mexico and be a foreman of the ranch over there. Well, I kind of had a few rabbits in my feet, you know how young fellers are. So I thought, well, I'd just take that job and move over to Moses, New Mexico. And we'd straightened up 3,000 head of steers coming out of the east. I would, and then we'd send them on to Eagle's Nest and Watrous for the summer, pasture them up there in them mountains. And of course, you know, they did, there's 2 old Spanish gentlemen there. And they was telling me, I asked them what they got paid. And this one old gentleman said, well, they got $7 a day. Said the feller we was working for said if they got through by 2 o'clock in the evening, they only got paid for a half a day. That'd be $3.50. So they had me a bank account set up, so I seen them 2 boys one day, and I said, y'all wouldn't mind if I went up on your wages? So I just doubled them. And I said, now there'll be no more half-a-days. If y'all come spend an hour or 10 hours, you're going to get that $15 a day. And then the little boss, he scolded me, he said, well, you pay them people as much as you're getting. I said, yeah, but they can do everything I can do. And I'd have to rope and doctor them cattle by myself. They'd help process them. We didn't have too much facilities. Old rock wall deal around out here at that old deal up there at Clayton, New Mexico. So a feller, you know, stayed, I guess this summer I moved up there. I was 40 years old in August the 30th of that year. Stayed up there, I guess, till 82. I got left there and got to leasing some land and buying some cattle and growing on my own. So a feller just kept, climbing that ladder a rung at a time and ended up down here working. And this other young'un over there, I've knew him and his dad, of course, ever since he just a little more out of a diaper. So a fellow, got acquainted with a lot of people over the years down in this area and up there, but I've about outlasted most of them. Well, I ordered my first fiddle when I was 11 years old from Montgomery Catalog for $16. I'd pulled enough cotton and fenced and saved my money and ordered it out of that old Montgomery Ward catalog. And of course, when it come, well, my dad, he could do a little something. He showed me how to tune it and all that stuff. Well, the mandolин's got the same notes. He just doesn't have to bow it. Well, I got picking around on that thing. By the time I run into 80, well, I could kind of pick a little something. We got playing around. Somebody'd have a dance just out at a ranch camp. These 6 or 8 couples want us to come play for them. We just knew, over the waves waltz and Fraulein, and I don't, boil the cabbage down. A few songs wasn't many, but them people, of course, they'd had a little cypress juice, and they'd dance and just had a big time. They thought we was professionals, I guess. Well, I still messed around and got married, moved right off out here at this old camp. And I got interested in getting my old fiddle out, sewing on it, So we had our first little girl, just a little baby, and I'd be sounding like just throwing a tomcat up on the steel roof, They'd just be a squawking and screeching. And my wife, she'd say, "I can still hear you." She'd send me down in the basement so it wouldn't disturb the little old young. And finally, I'd end up out playing with my horses. It's the reason they didn't have too much knowledge, while they eat. But finally got to where I could play a little bit. And me and Eddie, for a long time, just me and him would go and play, and I'd play the fiddle. And one time he likes to tell about this story. There's an old feller that just lived over there in Edge, Oklahoma. And he was an old bachelor and always wore his old spurs, and just, so he wanted to know if we knew a song called Old Red Rooster. Well, I asked him, we didn't have no idea, but when we was a kid, there's an old fellow we knew, he played a saw. Sounded like a steel guitar deal, and they had a little old band, and they'd be playing, "She'll be coming around the mountain, and we'll kill the old red rooster when she comes." So I asked Eddie, I said, "Reckon that's what it is." We cut down on that old boy, squalled and spurred himself, went to hollering and dancing. He said, "That's it." Of course, that's old red rooster, And the old gentleman, I think, within 2 or 3 weeks after that, he got drugged to death and killed down there on that Canadian River, working for some ranch over there at Bivens or somebody. But that's kind of funny, just happened to think about. Of course, me and him would tell stories from now on about going different places and playing, and had a lot of fun, We didn't pay for the money, I don't think, of it, or did get any. And then we done some recording back in '62. I still had a bass player. He'd put them on them cassettes. And then later on, he got to putting them on CDs. So I still got some of them old CDs of us right here. The bass player's wife, she'd just set up a deal over there and record the whole dance for the whole night, and people come by requesting stuff as they dance by, and so I've still got some of those that feller, could play them. We didn't want to make any money or anything, just done it for the fun of it.
You talked about when you first came and played here, and I know you played here for many, many years here at the Cowpunchers reunion. Can you tell me what that was like, in those days? It must have been very enjoyable seeing all the cowboys coming together.
Professionals, Of course, they didn't allow any drinking in here. Of course, you could take a sip outside and come in, but there'd be ladies and put their little old kids down the coat on them over there or over here, while maybe the mothers wanted to dance a little. Of course, we was playing, it'd be pretty hard to dance or playing electric instruments, or something. But it just made you feel kind of like you're someone to be able to come and play, knowing them old fellers had been coming here and roped out here. One of them old fellas I worked for him with him later, he had retired. He went to work for Bivens in 19 when he come back from World War I. And he'd come out in day work. And you could tell a lot of old stories, that happened to him. And kind of like I heard a fella say one time, when them old fellas died, I could just take their stories as mine. But, yeah, we really enjoyed coming and playing, and I guess we was reasonably good. They didn't ever run us off or, get up and leave. It stayed till it's over. But the old kids be laying just around under coats and stuff, and they'd man me up. When they get ready to go, them women go to uncover them to see which one's theirs. Yeah, I spent a lot of time here, and then ended up over there in Clayton. I even drove back from then to here and play on Saturday night till some of the boys got shipped out. Some of them was computer operators and different deals. They got shipped off and kind of cut the deal down to where it would just be one or two, maybe three for play, and finally just discontinued the whole deal. Of course, we got to meet a lot of people, and
Was there ever other musicians who would come in and sit in with you?
Well, sir, this young'un right here, I taught him and another boy. We called him Rooster. I named him. He and his dad come up there at that ranch, and he liked to watch them little game roosters, that kind of hack up, when they just little low. So he said his dad liked to watch them little old things, so I got to call him Rooster, and I guess it stayed with him till today. And taught him, he wanted to learn to play the fiddle. And I showed him the first two notes to Faded Love on that fiddle. And him and this boy here went on to be better fiddlers than I was.
Did you ever spend much time around Frankie McWhorter?
Well, yes, sir. And I had a neighbor who was going to get married over there at Moses, an old Catholic church. And that very day I got this finger jerked off. And of course I had it in that bandage. And I was supposed to help Frankie play after up there at the bar for after the wedding. And of course got that finger jerked off and had it wrapped up. He won't know if I was going to get to play. I said, well, he said, that won't hurt nothing. Just come on and play. And so I did. Me and my wife went up and listened to them. But I knew old Frankie, I've got a book that I bought on his life story. He was quite an old cowboy, old Frank, and he played Bob Wilson professionally way back, But he just ended up being an old cowboy over there at Canadian. He was quite an old feller. A lot of them old men, of course, they'd already seen more than a fella like me thought he'd ever live to see. And they could sure tell some good stories, on their lives, horse wrecks, and I can tell a bunch of them too. We wouldn't have time. That circle outfit, they had a ranch down at this side of Wichita Falls. And we'd have to load up all of our horses and tack and everything, go down there, stay 2 or 3 weeks and help them work through and then come back. Well, while I was down there, I was riding a bay horse that they had bought from, I guess, an uncle of mine. And he'd already fell with me once. An old cow broke out, and I went off a dirt tank. Down there, them old broom weeds would get up, stir up high, you know. A lot of them women would just make bundles of them, make floor sweepers out of them like a broom. And that horse hit a hole, and I looked up and seen the seat of that saddle. Just going over it, just spilt me out, kind of bumped my elbow, and I called him time to get back on him and come back to the ranch, and we started going to move some horses, and that bugger just reared up and fell backwards with me and got out of the way, and the foreman come running up there. Said, "Don't get back on that horse, we'll bring you a good one." And I don't know what they claim, maybe that horse, they worked him with a sign in his knees. You know, back them days, everybody went by the sign, you know, the dark of the moon and the light of the moon, and some of them would wean their calves unless it was the correct time, and some of them bull calves wouldn't walk and bowl or nothing. They had one Spanish lady that was her neighbor. She wouldn't do anything, plant, you know, in the dark of the moon or the light of the moon. And I went by there one day to see if the husband could come help me go to work in her calves on Monday. She said, "Don't do that." She had already looked at the almanac and said, you know, the blood's in the wrong deal to be castrating the calves. Well, I already had about 20 men, neighbors, and everybody lined up to start Monday morning. So I went ahead and, you know, started. We had good luck working the calves and stuff, but a lot of people, they went with that old almanac. They wouldn't do nothing unless it said so, you know. And I've had old men to say, don't cut them colts, especially if it's going down in the knees. And they thought that's what's wrong with this bay horse, causing him to be weak-kneed. So, you know, them old people all had ideas, and a lot of them, I guess, knew what they was talking about. Because they had done been down. I tell my grandson I'd already been down all them roads and had to build most of them. That old country I've got down there, a lot of piñons, cedar trees, you know, you can't see nothing hardly out on that top country. He's one boy here, I like to hunt Indian artifacts. We'd come and got a little cabin down there. We'd come down for 2 or 3 days, you know, and tell windies and play music, hunt the rocks. So I had a young boy helping me day work. Coming out of that old rough country up there, you know, you couldn't see nothing, nowhere. I looked up and he's looking at his aggravating phone. And I said, "Is there something wrong with that phone?" And I was wanting to pester him. He said, "Well, he's a Texan little feller down at Amistad, New Mexico, little friend." I said, "I believe if I was you, I'd be looking for a landmark. I may fall dead and you can't get out of here." So he put that old phone up, and I don't know, I seen him in 2 or 3 months. He come, shook my hand. He said, "You know, I don't look at that phone as much as I used to." But that's now then, they all carry them in their, it's kind of like years ago with the Bull Durham cigarette story. So a kid had gauntlets, you know, working a team or something. The old farmer said, "Now tomorrow, either you leave them gauntlets or that Bull Durham at home, I'd like to have at least half your time." Always stopping, rolling the cigarettes, you know. But that old kid, you know, he just never thought about it. Of course, we got that, what we call that old rabbit ear. These boys have seen him over a mountain. I can get up in the morning and look across there and see him. And so, you know, always, if I can see him, I'm never lost, no matter how deep the canyons and thick the trees. But that's just from working down near the mesquite trees. One morning we was going to go work. It was so foggy you couldn't see nothing. One of my wife's uncles, he was a fellow looked kind of like John Wayne to us. He always showed up with a white hat, clean pressed breeches and spurs. You know, he was a cowboy, a real one. He wasn't just make-believe. So he had about 6 of us young fellas following him. He was going to drop us off down on that Wichita River. Well, he just stopped down there, and I thought, what in the world's the matter with him? He got him a cigarette. He just tore the top out of an old hands big. He'd pick one out, and light it. Went telling little stories to us. His name was Skeet Raspberry. I thought, well, what's the matter with him? Well, that's a foggy. You couldn't see nothing. Couldn't even move mesquite trees. You couldn't even see the sun. So after a while, we heard somebody holler. He said, okay, boys, now we can start. He said, I hate to admit it, but I was lost. But the best thing when you're lost is just stop. Don't be unveiling around. You just get more lost, So I thought that was pretty good advice, and would do it today if I've been me and Eddie and them around them old jobs, trying together, and foggy, couldn't see nothing. We had to work teams back when I come here. So I'd rather ride the horse than drive the team. You'd stay warm a little bit, lope around. You had to throw your cattle in to the feed ground, and them fellers, they'd be dancing a lot of times, get off and drive them mules, get warm, But, I just back in the day where now they got the pickups and feeders on, they don't even have to get out. They can just stroll that feed, and lots of difference. And, of course, that phone deal, I guess, is one of my pet deals. And buggers just watch anybody over here in town, somebody's carrying a phone. I don't carry one, couldn't hardly use one if I had one, I just chose, I guess, not to do it. My dad, of course, he'd, put us on there to start out like Indians. He'd just say, get a handhold, son. He'd just get you with the arm and throw you up on them. And he'd kind of hold them, kind of visit with about how to hold your reins, said don't hold them tight. He was one of them fellers, he said if he throws you off, he just get back on him. But don't be a pulling on his old head, He'd school us. And then you learned, and then after got out, like I was saying, riding them 30 saddles for, $10. One time there's a feller come in there and had about a 6-year-old mare with a saddle on her in a trailer. Packed up out there and won't know if I'd be interested in riding her. I said, well, looked like she's already been rode. He said, yeah, but she's been running out there in the pasture for 6 weeks with my saddle on. He saddled her and she jumped out, and he finally got her captured. So I suspected her, and I just tied my stake rope on her halter in the trailer and opened that tailgate. Boy, she just left there under whip, turned her over out there, stood her on her head, and she got up and looked around, see what was happening. And I went ahead and rode her for that, $10 a month. And that's how we kind of, with other work, I'd take jobs driving old tractors for $4 a night, or even $4 a day for them farmers. Anything to get that brother of mine to have something to eat. My dad had bought a house before he passed away there in Crowell. And so we still had to pay the electricity and, sewer and everything. So a fella had to hunt work all the time. And I like to tell it on my younger brother, Jerry. He liked to sit down there, and visit with his buddies till about 2 o'clock. And then come and get in the bed and didn't want to get up. So sometimes I'd drag him out in the floor on the mattress, pour cold water on him. I figured he'd hate me. Get him up. He just wanted to visit with his friends like all of them did. But we never did have an argument till he passed away, and worked with him, and had 5 brothers. And never had a disagreement or argument with any of them. All the years, they're all gone, but me, and I got a younger brother, I called him, he wasn't able to come out. That he had won a scholarship playing football down here at WT. So he went down and played a season or two, and I was in my wife lived out here at this little old camp just over the hill and wanted me to teach him how to be a cowboy. And went to working with him, kind of showing him how to little rope and ride a pitching horse and stuff. And he went on to up there and got a job where Eddie had worked years ago. And he made a good one. He could ride a pitching horse and rope. And he was real quiet. And he was batching off down there in the old camp. Finally, he got married. I'd always kid his wife. I said, I don't know how y'all got married. You never did talk. Okay. He'd ride the horse. I didn't have no pickups and trailers back in them days. He'd ride the horse about 4 miles across there. It'd be there at 4 o'clock breakfast there at headquarters. And we had an old Indian fellow there called Don Doby. Had worked for that Matador 50-something years and retired. He liked to play solitary. And when Ivan would get there, they'd just speak. And he played solitary. And they just, every once in a while, if one happened to win, he just looked like me to you, and they just grinned at one another. That's all he ever said. Yes, sir, that old Indian, he was like Eddie. He was working over here in the saddle shop. And he wore them good wool clothes, in the winter. He had to take them by the cleaner. You couldn't just wash them. He'd have me to come in as an excuse usually to go by over there and talk to Eddie there at that saddle shop. And he is a funny feller. If he was sitting right here, if we said something that's kind of funny, he'd just grin. He never would get in the conversation, no way in the world. He said one time he borrowed an old Model T car to go to a dance. It quit, and he said, as far as I know, it's still sitting there. He never had a driver's license or nothing all them years, But he'd been in the military, and he drawed a little check of some kind. So one time he wanted me to, if he had one of them old long envelopes, he said he wanted to put some stuff in the bank. So Amarillo National down here. So I don't know how many of them ranch checks he had never cashed. Army checks, Social Security, everything. And just stuck them in this envelope and wrote Don Doby on it. And had me to pull up to that deal, and he just opened that door and dropped it in there. He said, if I ever wrote a check on that, I'd probably have to get somebody to identify me. And then when he passed away, I'd forgotten how many $1,000 he had down at Clarington in the bank and right here at Amarillo. He just never did buy nothing. He liked that little old chocolate candy with a cherry in it. And of course, he didn't have any teeth, so it'd be as soft for him to eat. And we had 3 little old girls, me and my wife, there at that ranch up there, and we'd go to this grocery store. And old Don, he'd walk around, you'd see him, he'd like marshmallows, He'd mash them with his finger. He said, well, that bunch ought to be thrown in jail keeping these old things. They're too tough. And he'd just drag them off and pay for them with this chocolate candy he liked. Well, when he got down there at the ranch, he never would say it. We'd get nearly down there. He said, won't you give these girls? Said they can probably eat it. You just buy it for them,
It sounds like you've spent your whole life cowboying and ranching and playing music. Was there ever anything else you thought of doing, or was that just what you always loved?
I just didn't want to do anything else.
What is it about this life that you think has held your interest all these years?
Well, I just always wanted to be free. Like today, if I get on a horse, see what I'd want to do. A little funny story right quick. I come here and me and Eddie was going back. We never did drink any water and stopped at a windmill. Water horses. Yeah. Don't drink any of this water. It's jip water. Make you sick. Of course, I didn't tell him I was raised on it. We'd have to catch water off the roof of the old house, and put in a cistern, rain. And then if we run out of that water, we'd go down to the creek. And my dad just would load about 2 old 55-gallon barrels of just red mud water. Put in them barrels when that mud settled out, well, we'd put the clear water in that old cistern so we could draw it up, and catch it off of the deal. These young people, they can't imagine we already died a long time ago. There's water moccasins and frogs and everything else in that water. Cattle been tromping in it. Put her in there, let it settle out. It'd be clear. Pour it in there, and I don't think any of us ever did get sick from, contaminated water. Yeah, it's pretty tough back them days. But a feller, I wouldn't change it, I don't think. The people I've met, and different horses you rode around them ranches, they all, like me and Eddie, we was a little bit bronchier maybe than some. Well, we'd have horses, would turn them out, say like all winter or something, and we'd get them up in the spring. They'd been turned out for 6 months. Boy, them boogers are fresh. So we'd either draw straws or thump a penny so you get to try that new horse to wrangle on. And some of them old things, I'll guarantee you, test you are pretty good, But he is a lot better rider than I was, flashier. I just rode kind of like a boar monkey, Main strength and awkwardness. Of course, just grew up down, we didn't have no electricity or lantern lights or lamp lights. My dad, he'd come in off that horseback deal, but to have the supper ready, no lantern or lamp out there in the middle of that table. He always sat down at the west end. I sat down here at the east end looking at him this way. He wouldn't say a word. He didn't ask us if we had our chores done. That was all mandatory. He just ate. Didn't ever, he was for early on, he wore them old overalls just, he could ride a bronc and had rode some, not professionally, but they had a deal where they'd go ride stuff down there, we call it a chutes playground deal, and had an old airplane we could get in. But he just never did ask us, we all knew what we had to do, you just done it. And didn't want to get scolded, and just grew up that way. He wasn't mean to us, but, we expect you to do what you was asked to do, But, of course, when he passed away there, when I was just fixing to go into freshman, of course, I was born August the 30th. Well, school started September the 1st. So I just one day too early. I had some cousins and friends, they was born September the 5th and 6th, so they had to wait another year. So I took out, when my mother left, and I took out my senior year, I got a senior ring. So I took it out that year to help the kids and help my mother. She'd come back home. And so, you just get to thinking that no 14-year-old kid is not too knowledgeable, hadn't got too much of a direction. I guess we was pretty ornery down there for a while. And finally, the mayor, he is a kin folks to us, come up there one day and knocked on the door. He said, "Did you ever think about going to the Army?" Which, just a little bit wild around there, I guess, different time than old cars. I like fast horses and fast cars. But a feller, survived, and pretty thankful that he done kind of pretty much what he wanted to do after he got out on his own and make his own decisions. And the thing I found out the worst was I was my own worst boss. You know, was always, instead of sleeping, I'd go do something, or if I had people helping me, like out here at the ranch. We worked 7 days a week down there around those ranches. They'd let us off after, have us do ride something on Sunday morning. And they'd say, if you want to go to town, get you some Bull Durham or see your girlfriend or get your clothes, whatever, just be back at 6 o'clock, do the chores. That's the only time you had off in a month. And then so I thought, if I ever get the position where I can have the say, I'd let them boys off at noon on Saturday. And I'd just tell them, I said, don't care what you do while you're gone. Just be in that stall there Monday morning at 6 o'clock. And I don't need to know what you do when you go. And then there'd be young boys come by all the time wanting to get a job. They say, oh, we understand this is a good place to work. And I like to rope better than anybody, I guess. We'd just gang up around the windmill. And everybody hold the cattle, like you, I'd tell you go out there and rope a calf. And I'd send Eddie out there to heel it. Under control, turn them loose, come back. Well, the next day or two, you could ride right up that windmill, the cattle wouldn't even. I said, as long as we do it under control, fella will do it. And I was the first one to want to rope, And I done a little roping in the head and heeling and regular rodeo deals, but that wasn't my deal. I never did. My dad took us that first Santa Rosa roundup over there at Vernon, and the old boy that used to come down there on a motorcycle, it's kind of like that man in the Continental suit. He pulled up out there, and they got to laughing. When he left there, he had all their money. So they went over to Quanah, Texas, the next weekend, and he is over there. Come to find out, he is a professional clown. And when we went over there at that first Santa Rosa roundup, he went around there behind talking to him and some of them professional cowboys. Because as we went by there, that old Pocoano stud, he is champion. He is living in a straw little old house and everything, air conditioner. I told my dad, I said, he's got a better house than we got. But he took us around there and got to, see some of them real. I never did want to be a rodeo cowboy. I just wanted to ride them like me and Eddie out there for the fun of it a lot of times. Then some of them would pull it when you didn't want them to. But another thing my dad would do, after he got to riding in the saddle, one of them colts blow up. If he seen you was go to take that saddle horn, he'd spank you the rope. He said, boy, turn that thing loose. It's to drag with, not to hold on. Said that thing you'll pull on it and get out of balance and throw it off. And that boy right there can tell you, he never did see me get one, Until this day, I never did. Just grew up not doing it, Just figured I could ride them anyway, but a lot of them boys, they tried, some of them tried that professional rodeoing and it cost a lot of money. I had one boy to come to work for me, and he was a head and healer. He was always wanting me to go. And I said, I don't want to spend my hard-earned money for, entrance fees and not get nothing out of it. I got a family I'd rather take care of, and he just couldn't stand it because I wouldn't take off, and we didn't let anybody bring a horse to the ranch or take ours away, on account of disease. And then when things get that distemper, man, it'd ruin that whole deal. You couldn't ride them, because bubbles come up on them. And so down there at that circle outfit, they got that distemper. Well, my brother-in-law later on, they'd rodeo hands and rode these young horses down for another at Minnick Ranch, down further south side where we was at. Well, they got to where they couldn't ride them old colts. They just went off and turned them loose. He had been flanking them and everything else. His rodeo hands. So when our horses got distemper, well, this Skeet Raspberry, wife's uncle, he said they got some 6-7-year-old horses down there that had been rode about 3 years. Said we can bring them up here and y'all can ride them to work the cattle and stuff on till the mothers get, healed up. Boy, you talk about some old snorty, bug-eyed things. Of course, we'd kind of, another boy, kind of like Eddie, is a good kind of bronc rider type feller, named Jack Johnson. And we'd kind of warm them around, a little bit, get on them old things, and I'll guarantee you they're a little tough. So we got them strung around and ride them down that brush. Trees would just be a trail. And I'd had old Adolph bars, that fellas make me a pair of spurs in 56. And everybody liked to hear them old rails jingle going down through there. Boy, every once in a while, one of them boys ahead of you, was good honest, she'd hold one of them limbs, see, quite a bit, and then he'd go fly back and hit that old pony in the face. It was a little bit tough, Of course, I never did get thrown off, but they'd kind of go looking somewhere to get down if you had to. But that's just some of them deals, you run into other ranches, especially the reason they never did want to take any horses to town or bring any out. They'd been exposed, for all kind of different diseases and stuff. And like out here, we had 36 brood mares. At the LXs and then the XLs had 26. So we always had, horse colts to ride for the company. So I'd kind of tried to treat my hounds pretty good. I had, of course, at one time, 3 of us brothers working up there at XLs. And so when it come time to go to choosing them young horses to ride, I'd pick the one I liked the best and put him off in another pen. And I'd tell you, pick you one. Then Eddie could pick one. Old Glenn could pick one. Everybody go around and you had a second choice. Instead of me dictating what you was going to ride, let you pick it. And I thought that was a good, honest way to do that, rather than I wanted to be I guess what they'd call you, a working foreman. I'd rather they had, leaders and you had pushers. I'd saddle up and go with them boys, just like one of the hands. I didn't want to think I was any better off or any more authority than they had, and got along great, with it. And I've worked, and this boy right here could tell you he had worked for an old man. He'd hire an old kid that never had even bridled a horse. And then for him, because he didn't know anything, and he'd dictate what horse, that's what this young'un said. It kind of ruined him. He didn't do nothing unless that old man dictated what horse to catch, what to ride, when to be back, just dictated everything. And I was a little more freelance, I didn't want to be a boss. I just wanted to work with them, get the job done. And people come by there, they just couldn't understand why we didn't always needing boys would come by, and I'd say, well, nobody hadn't left. If they do leave, well, I'll let you know. But I thought that was kind of wasn't a feather in my hat, but made me feel good. That just kind of treating. I had to fire one old kid, got where he wouldn't wake up, like to sleep. So this old Don Dobie, I was going to wake that better, the breakfast bell rung. My wife at that time was cooking there at that deal. So she rung the old bell, and this old kid didn't get up. So I said, he said, don't wake that sorry booger, he talked pretty bad. So we just rode off and left him. Well, somewhere I guess he woke up and kind of followed the tracks and caught up. I just spoke to him, how you doing today? Nothing. So when we got back, I went in to dinner. I said, next time you don't get up, I'll usually say, well, rolly outfit, they called it. So he got along there pretty good just for a month or so, and it happened again. Of course, old Don, he is one of them old timers. He said, let that so-and-so sleep, So this time he didn't, he just standing there at the bunkhouse porch when he'd come in for dinner. And I just, how are you doing? Just pleasantly visited with him. While I was over there, I just wrote his check out. Come back and handed it to him. He this big old kid just went to crying. Made me feel bad. But then later on, he called back. He'd gotten married way off down here south. I don't know if he had a place for a married man. I said, yeah, they had a Spanish boy. Worked there. He wanted to go back to 460s and work. I said, we got that mobile home if you don't mind living in it. He didn't mind it. So I said, now there's just one stipulation. He said, I know what that is. And he'd be the first one at that saddle house every morning. Later on, I was out here at this 100-year deal at the Alexis. And he was there, and he said, that's the best advice a man could ever give a feller, We just got to get up, no matter what. But I enjoyed I didn't want to be a boss. I just wanted to be somebody to suggest what we needed to do. And so a feller, he felt good about himself. He wasn't trying to be dishonest, and feller never did talk bad to anybody. A lot of them fellers always just, everything they said, they had to be a cussing or talking bad about it, So my grandson, he about 18 now, and he told me, he said, Pop, why don't you just say one cuss word? Like he said, you ham-headed, no good, sorry, bunch of words, But I just never did. Don't remember ever saying anything. One time out here at this Sable Barn, I worked there a while, and the foreman there sent me down there. They had them 600 pens, they call them, if they sell them odd cattle first. I had a Jersey bull and an old Hertford cow coming up the alley. And I was complaining. I said, you no good, rafter hip Jersey saurian. This Cecil Trammell said, J.M., quit discussing him and just bring him. But I just never did think of it, I've had hips replaced, shoulders, knees, everything in the world just about it. Neck, bionic man, but I never did think about saying anything bad about it.
Folks, that's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank my friends at the Western Cowpunchers Association in Amarillo, Texas, for introducing me to J.M. Cates and for arranging this interview. You can look them up online at westerncowpunchers.com. I'd like to thank Flint Custom Hats for sponsoring today's episode. You can look them up online and order your own hat at flinthat.com. I'd like to thank Hal Cannon for playing the Cowboy Crossroads theme music. You can look up Hal at halcannon.com. I'd like to thank my Trail Boss patrons, Bob Kelly, Chris Ryden, Scott Anderson, Paige Marie Polis, Gabe Rosen, and Helen DeZio for their support of this episode. If you're enjoying Cowboy Crossroads and would like to help me keep it going, you can become a patron at patreon.com/cowboycrossroads. That's patreon.com/cowboycrossroads. You can also make a donation on my website at andyhedges.com. If you'd like to contact me with a question or a comment or a story, I'd love to hear from you. Send an email to andy@andyhedges.com. Thank you for listening to Cowboy Crossroads.